Assessment regularly hits the headlines as the media and employers debate the value of exam results. Whilst this argument is predictable, away from the spotlight there are developments in e-assessment which are potentially far more important in the long term and likely to provoke even stronger reactions. They include using mobile phones to test pupils at the time of their choosing.
How can we get people involved? And we don't want them to write down. Well, the answer is we get them to speak.
So immediately you can see here is
abandoning the idea of ascribing numerical marks to students' work.
It'll be a complete revolution in assessment when you no longer depend upon numbers.
And even letting students know exam questions in advance.
I would say that if a student knows the questions in advance, it's an even more demanding examination.
There are radical developments in e-assessment which could change the face of examinations and testing forever. And this programme is going to the cutting edge to see what they are. Any debate on e-assessment is likely to start with traditional examinations. They're little changed from Victorian times. Each summer, children are herded into halls at the mercy of hay fever, heat and hormones, and asked to use pens and paper to record their knowledge. Is this the way it ought to be in the 21st century?
I think we, as an education system, have worked for many, many years on the process of pouring the knowledge in and then checking that it's there by getting someone to write it down. And I think that society has moved on since that was a valid way of testing children.
For me, there's no escape. ICT is here to stay and will become part of every assessment and every piece of work that children do in the future.
The idea that technology is the answer to more effective assessment will be controversial. Changes to the traditional exam model are likely to meet howls of horror in some quarters.
I don't think there are very many innovative models of how these technologies can be used that aren't going to end up in headlines in the red tops to say our gold standards have been abused by children using mobile phones or cheating on the internet or whatever. I'm not surprised that it's like wading through glue at times.
I think trying to overcome the natural conservatism that people feel about the existing examination system where working alone on a test in a room for a limited period of time is the norm. Overcoming that conservatism is going to be difficult.
I think the audience that will find it harder is those of us of my generation in particular, who will often look at, well, this is the kind of system that I went through, this is the assessment that I experienced, and really anything else has got to be easier.
But the first electronic GCSE already exists. So too does a national curriculum test in ICT. Is the exam about to go digital? A key technique of e-assessment is multiple choice questioning. That attracts accusations of dumbing down, of pupils guessing answers or copying answers from neighbours. The new thinkers say technology prevents this.
The questions you're asked or the range of possible answers in the multiple choice can be randomised, so there's no question of anybody communicating to another candidate or even sitting next to somebody who's displaying the same test on a screen, but will have actually different questions with different possible answers. So technology has some advantages in that sense.
What we can't allow to happen is to suddenly dilute that range of item types into a very simple level, such as multiple choice item types, simply because that's convenient for a digital medium.
And when it comes to current concerns about coursework and cheating, new technology can also have a positive benefit, recording work in progress and who is doing it.
There's a certain degree to which the new technology we have available to us can allow us to see the process by which children have developed their work. We are no longer really serious about being unable to distinguish between one child's work and another. And the reason for that is we can take account of their development over time.
The classic question raised by the sceptics is, how can a computer mark an essay on Hamlet? While software exists to check spelling and basic grammar, computers cannot yet judge how good or bad an essay may be.
We have conducted various pieces of research looking at what's termed the automatic essay marking or automatic extended response marking, but it's not reliable enough in any way, shape or form at the moment to let loose on a high-stakes examination.
I think the moment we remove the teacher from any part of this process, then we're opening ourselves up for a lot of problems. The moment we say to a computer, here's a voice, tell me what level they're at, I think we're in for a big wake-up call.
Part of the issue, though, is not whether they're capable of doing so, but it's to do with credibility. It has to do with whether those people who are taking the test or the assessment and those people who are receiving a qualification that says this learner has demonstrated the following capabilities actually trust the concept of technology marking that depth of understanding and capability.
Only a very small percentage of what we do will ever truly be what we would class as computer-based assessment, where the computer is making judgments about the responses that they get back. And where a computer is very good at doing those things is on the more objective end of the spectrum, the typical multiple choice and simple type questions, because computers are very logical, and where an output is either right or wrong, 1 or a 0, the computer can respond to that in a very logical fashion and a very consistent fashion, which has a value in itself.
In the absence of software that can judge the brilliance or otherwise of an essay on Hamlet, perhaps the real value of computers in the next few years may be in the classroom rather than the exam hall. One e-assessment tool developed by an exam board focuses not on high-stakes summative assessment, but on formative assessment for lower-stakes testing.
Yes.
This software tests maths ability. Pupils answer questions and get an immediate decision on whether they're right or wrong. At the same time, teachers get information on their pupils' progress.
Children are set tests based on maybe the last topic they've done, the last half term of topics they've done, and then the programme generates different questions for them. And the students filling in the questions then get a feedback at the end of the test as to how they've got on.
These pupils are all answering questions on exactly the same topics, such as fractions or percentages. But they each get different questions from the software, so they can't copy answers from a neighbour's screen. The computer analyses how a student is answering and adjusts the questions accordingly, moving them up through levels of difficulty if they're correct, and trying again if they get it wrong.
The students would start off at a question at the lowest level. If they get one correct, then we're pretty confident they've got it correct because it's a fill in the blank. The programme then moves it on to the second level of difficulty within that objective. If they get it wrong, then later on within the test, the programme generates another question for them to try.
And as soon as the lesson is over, the computer has all the results analysed for teacher Merrill Carter.
And if I go into the teaching plan, it'll give me information on what the students have done against each objective. So, for instance, understanding and using decimal notation and place value, 12.5% of them have got that correct, which is worrying, so I'm going to have to go back to that in the lesson. It then gives me, I've got some suggestions here for things that I can do and key teaching points. And then I can just go through and have a look at each particular student. So it gives me each objective, what the level is, who got it right, what percentage of the class got it right, and teaching suggestions for next.
Is you've actually put the smallest one at the end. Yes, because if you read it, it says put smallest to the largest. Yeah, so that one should be at the front, shouldn't it? Yeah, you need to look at the numbers after the decimal point.
This model is actually bringing testing in schools closer to what young people do in their spare time, according to Mike Rumble.
Learners themselves have always valued instantaneous feedback, and computers are extremely good at providing that. The best evidence you could have of that is young people's involvement in computer-based games. It's interesting that some people talk about children being mindlessly involved with boring, useless learning, playing games. Actually, young people play computer-based games because they're difficult. They actually play them because they're hard. They're challenged, they're stretched, they have to solve problems, they continually get things wrong. But they immediately get feedback, which enables them to take the mistake and learn from it. So computer games are actually a perfect example of instantaneous feedback, and the fact that young people are so committed to them is a good indicator of the value.
Now put a green in, and then I'll go into there. Put green in there? No, in there.
Transfer that into the classroom, or to whatever the learning environment is, and the fact that it is possible to get some instant feedback in what you're doing allows you two things. One, to continue to learn at a reasonable pace instead of waiting until you get some feedback. But it also means that youngsters are more prepared to try things out.
If we look at actually what the students are going to be asked when they leave school, they're going to be a lot of the time sitting in front of computers, digesting information and then working out answers to from the information they've been given. So I think assessment for learning, using assessment online, is actually moving with today's world.
So instant feedback for teacher and pupil, and a stronger association between what pupils do at home and what they do at school could be beneficial, according to the technology advocates. But could it be taken further? What about using a beloved possession of most teenagers as a tool for assessment? Blue Sky Thinkers Ultralab have run trials using mobile phones as a way of sitting exams.
I know that it was accurate because I checked on different websites as well to see that their websites had the same information so that they were accurate.
So when we were looking at this, we were saying, how can we do this examination? How can we get people involved? And we don't want them to write down. Well, the answer is we get them to speak.
And it's quite clear that mobile telephony was becoming a big hit with youngsters. That they were able to use them freely and competently, and that therefore they might be the right medium for expressing ideas about what they knew.
If the phone is the tool that is going to be used to do the assessment, why does it have to be done in one room with everyone else at the same time? We can do this anywhere around the country, at the phone box down the road, or at a local pizza house with your mates while you're just about to have your food. I must make my answers now.
The students' identities are checked by comparing their answers against a voice print to guard against the possibility that anyone else is answering for them. But who's asking the questions?
We did some research into which voices would be best for children, and we involved children in that research as well, and we found that they were more nervous when there was a very human voice at the end. So the robotic voice tended to be more favourable, and I think it was the female robotic voice was the most favourable.
But when it came to marking, there was no question of robotic input. Control remained firmly with real people.
The answers were actually translated into text, and then the text was printed out for an assessor to read through, just as they would any other exam. Now, the idea here is that that doesn't have to be the case, but at this point, the speech-to-text mechanisms that are available are not sufficiently advanced to allow us to be able to go directly to the computer, and I'm not sure I'd be comfortable if they were.
Another aspect of the same project looked at whether pupils could be encouraged to take more responsibility for their own learning. In an approach which some might see as counterintuitive, this involved pupils knowing exam questions in advance.
I suppose the underlying philosophy that pushed us towards this was the capability of the child to take responsibility for learning. And that doesn't seem to me too radical. That seems to me just common sense.
The model adopted to shift responsibility back to students got them to assess their own academic levels in a subject, in this case, Key Stage 3 ICT. Students needed to gather evidence of their work over time and save it in an electronic rather than paper portfolio. It was tested at a school in Essex.
They established their own e-portfolio of work online by uploading files they'd chosen to demonstrate work that was a particular milestone, in their opinion, of their own learning, where they made a significant improvement in what they'd done.
As well as teachers, parents and fellow pupils were able to see the work online and were actively encouraged to comment on it.
We saw some stunning examples of children going in and saying, "That's good, I like that, I didn't understand this bit." Typically, tell me two things you like and one thing you'd like to know more about, was largely where people were going, but it was very, very strong, and we found that children were able to more easily articulate their learning amongst their peers.
A lot of them were perhaps insecure that living and working in this part of Essex, their work wasn't as good as it might be. A big inferiority complex it goes with a lot of pupils around here. But they're able to get a very good reinforcement of their skills, the fact they were working at the cutting edge of national standards at the time, and gained a lot of recognition, gained hugely in self-confidence.
The project included a final test, but there was one massive difference to other more conventional exams. The pupils knew what the questions would be because they'd chosen them themselves.
I would say that if a student knows the questions in advance, it's an even more demanding examination because they then are called upon to give the very fullest account of their own work. And if they don't do it thoroughly, having known the questions in advance, it's far more telling than if something has escaped somebody's memory on one day in particular when they weren't expecting any particular question.
If you keep secret from a child what it is you're going to test them, then you are in many ways setting them up for a failure because they don't know where they're going in their learning. If you can say, look, you're heading this way, you need to map your own path to that destination, then the child takes control of their learning, they take charge of where they're going. Once they know how to succeed, my goodness, they succeed.
But again, the new technology advocates are going one step further. As well as knowing questions in advance and being tested orally, what if on-demand assessment is extended to students also dictating when they feel ready to be tested?
Assessment on demand gives you the opportunity of saying, I've learned this, I'm capable of doing this, now is the time for me to prove that I can do it. And that seems to me to be not only a much fairer method, but also a method that gives an opportunity of spreading the load of assessment over a longer period of time.
Being able to take the test when they were ready, down to the time of day and knowing where they were going to be, enabled them to have the self-confidence to give absolutely the best performance they could.
The project didn't make it past pilot stage, despite attracting a lot of attention. Another sign, perhaps, of understandable caution about such big changes in thinking. Another team of researchers is also challenging convention, this time experimenting with the process of learning as well as its assessment.
We were in a classroom when we were working on the paper-based project, and the teacher pointed out to me a couple of lads talking away in the corner, almost arguing in the corner about their work. And he said, if we could capture what they were saying to each other, we would know so much more about what they understand about their work and what they're trying to do. And he was right. And for most assessment purposes, we just lose all that data.
So what the team at Goldsmiths did was set up a project to use PDAs, or personal digital assistants, to help capture all that lost data, testing it in a D&T project on the design of a pill dispenser. Each student had their own PDA to help create real-time e-portfolios.
It's not like other portfolios that people use where it's completely summative. You do the activity and then when you've done it, you sit down and write about it or draw pictures about it or gather the stuff. It happens while you're doing it. And because of that, it helps to prompt what you might do next. So it's more than an assessment activity.
The way in which an e-portfolio becomes extremely valuable is when the learner themselves is involved in presenting evidence of their learning, so that they're able to say, I need to demonstrate that I am capable of working collaboratively with other people on a focused assignment. And here is the evidence that I've collected over a period of time. But one of the assessment objectives might be to say, but can you communicate that to me?
Teachers were initially quite guarded and were very keen for us to run the activity and watched with interest. But by the second day, they were not only wanting to be involved in driving the activity, but beginning to say, gosh, if we had these, we could do this. And I hadn't thought about it like that before. And goodness me, they're not much different than mobile phones. And we tell the kids to leave their mobile phones at home, and they've all got better cameras in their mobile phones than we have in the school, haven't they? And so there were lots of realisations happening as a result of having a focus on the digital technologies. The kids took to them instantaneously.
We want you to put your first ideas down of any way that you might think about solving the task that you've been presented with, about the pill organiser project, where you're containing and carrying, filling and dispensing, using and desiring.
With all the work captured digitally on a website, the Goldsmiths team realised that the e-portfolio model enabled them to use a radical alternative approach to traditional marking. Conventionally, each element within the portfolio is assigned a certain number of marks.
And it's fraught with difficulties, not least to do with the meaning of those numbers. You know, if it's 6 out of 10 for ideas, what's the difference between 6 and 7? Does that mean to get 7, are they just more ideas? Or are they better ideas? And what's better mean? And so there's all kinds of difficulty about attaching numbers to little bits and pieces of this portfolio, which is one of the reasons why GCSE assessment has typically been challenged for its reliability. It is a problem.
I've often seen it in the past where teachers have a view of the rank order of the work in their group. They know that they have a view that this one's better than that one. Then they'll apply the marking criteria, and actually, when you add them all up, this one, which they know is in the middle somewhere, actually appears somewhere near the top, because they've marked the individual components. And then they'll go through and reallocate the marks to put the piece of work back where they know it should be.
One of the main models of ranking was developed in the 1920s by the American psychologist Louis Leon Thurston. He challenged the validity of the idea of awarding marks.
And he made the point that when I'm trying to allocate numbers to this piece of work, those numbers don't have objective meaning. What I'm trying to do in my head is compare this piece of work with another piece of work that I'm holding in my head that I think is representing a 6. And then I say, this piece of work is equivalent to this piece I've got in my head that represents a 6, so I'll give it a 6. And Thurston, back in the 1920s, said, well, why don't we look at this piece of work and compare it directly to that piece of work? And then say, which of these two pieces is the better?
But critically, this judgmental pairs system, which depends on assessors making lots of comparisons of pairs of work, can't work if the documentation cannot easily be shared. But when it's all electronic and easy to access, this problem goes away. The team at Goldsmiths believe that with ICT helping to remove the key technical limitation of this approach, ranking deserves serious consideration as a potentially more consistent approach to assessment than marking.
You could create a very robust hierarchy with the one that always won the comparison at the top and the one that always lost the comparison at the bottom, and the work would order itself in between.
Just above the middle, you've got the ones that win a bit more than they lose. And below the middle, you've got those that lose a bit more than they win. And you end up with a complete rank order from which you can do the normal awarding process that the awarding bodies undertake. It'll be a complete revolution in assessment when you no longer depend upon numbers. This original concept, which looks like it's based on one of those rotating air freshener things. By the time he gets to box 4, it's been through his mates. You can still see the form, but it's got lots of additional elements to it.
The Goldsmiths team was attracted by the simplicity of the theory, but initially were sceptical about its ability to deliver valid and reliable results.
We'd found, as judges rather than markers, we found the process really much easier than we'd imagined. So we'd set aside a whole day to do it, and it took a morning. But looking at these two pieces of work, I think I'd make the judgment that this pupil has been on a longer, more complicated journey and travelled further and considered more complexity than this pupil.
We're now in the second round on this rank order. We're looking at pieces that are relatively close on the rank order to sharpen up the accuracy of the rank. And because the pieces are actually closer together, the judgments are somewhat harder to make. I can't say that it has worked yet, because we're not quite there yet, but I'm confident that it will.
Clearly there remains work to do before traditional marking can be consigned to history. And even if the technique can be made robust, it's a big leap to imagine its implementation. But technology advocates will keep pushing at the boundaries, and they're targeting the exam halls for the earliest changes.
I do dream of the time when we don't expect to measure children's capability by how well they can perform in isolation, with a pen, in a room, for a certain 3 hours, which is fixed.
What then might the exams of the near future look like?
If I were to guess at where exams might be in the future, they will be, in the context of portfolio, they will be about recording students' work over time, and they will be about summarising and coming up with summative judgments.
And of course, summative judgments are essential, not least because examinations provide a snapshot of achievement for, amongst others, employers.
We still need those summative judgments because in the end, we need to help people find their career and apply for jobs. And you can't apply for a job and get an interview simply on the basis of a portfolio, and we need to find the most reliable way to that summative result.
If we talk to employers, they say they want young people who are versatile, flexible, willing to learn, have the right attitudes, are capable of taking information and acting on their own initiative, to work independently and collaboratively. If those are the ingredients that we as a society and an employing society consider are important, then we need to assess those capabilities.